Wow.
Hank Shocklee! How's it going?
I'm good, Scott. How are you, man?
I'm really, really good. I just got, it's the end of my school week, so now I get to really enjoy doing this, because sometimes I do these shows in the middle of the school week, especially now going out of midterms into finals, and I'm all, kind of jacked up for that, but now I actually get to enjoy it and enjoy the weekend. I have that to look forward to me.
Good.
How you been? Where are you coming to us from right now?
Coming to you from New York, Long Island, New York, to be exactly.
How far out of the city are you?
I'm about like 50, more like an hour out.
Have you come into the city lately at all?
Yeah, I've came in yesterday, to be exact.
Oh, geez.
Yeah.
Is that like a regular thing? Are you coming in a lot, even since COVID?
Yeah, I spend all my time in the city.
Oh, really?
Yeah, that's why I like to spend the time out in Long Island, because it gives me a break, a distance from it.
Yeah, that's kind of why. I mean, trust me, I'm still in the city, but I'm out in Brooklyn and Bed-Stuy, where at least it's like the buildings are a little shorter, so it's not like you have that like engulfed feeling from New York, which is great, and it's especially coming from a musician standpoint, it's motivating to have all that energy around. But it's nice to come out here and where it's just not suburban at all. It's still very much a city, but it's a little bit more like a town instead of just that like massive industry, which Manhattan is.
Yeah. I call Manhattan the fishbowl.
The fishbowl. It is. You know what? It is. It's kind of like Disney World almost. If you ever go down to Florida and you're like, wow, this is crazy. This whole area must be like this. Then you go right outside of it. It's completely different.
That's right. That's right.
That's kind of what New York's like. But have you always been from Long Island?
Yeah, pretty much. I've lived most of my life, in Long Island. Except for, a brief stint in Los Angeles. But yeah, pretty much spent most of my time here. I like New York,
You're a New Yorker at heart?
Yeah, I think so. I think at this particular point in time I am, because, so much has happened here. So much is, it's like the pulse of everything is right here,
Absolutely.
And you're kind of like in between the time zones, you're like in between the London time and the West Coast time. So you're kind of like right dab in the middle.
It's a nice place to be. I kind of like the thing I like about New York over. I know I haven't been to a bunch of cities, but just the vibe I have from living here for the last few years is that it seems like a lot of live stuff is done here in terms of, just the live entertainment industry is huge here, but also like there's a lot of, live news broadcasts. It seems like everything's in the moment, as opposed to a lot of other cities where they're doing, massively big productions, but it's like, movies and TV that you're not going to see, for months from the time that they shoot it.
Well, that's the one good thing about New York, and it used to be a very vibrant music scene. It kind of like, over the years, it kind of like gotten a little subdued, but it's been a big music haven, for everybody, every act in the world. If you didn't come through New York, you didn't kind of make it,
And how long were you in LA?
I would say for about maybe 7 years.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. From 91 around to 97.
And what were your thoughts on it? What were your thoughts on it coming from New York? Was it a big culture shock, and did you like it very much when you were there?
No, I thought it was cool. It just reminded me of being in Long Island. It wasn't that much of a difference, in terms of being there. The thing that was a little bit weird for me was the lag in the time zone, which was everything was a little late to me.
Yeah, because you're used to all the Eastern Standard Time. Exactly,
and also the everyone's pretty laid back there, and so I'm used to people rushing for no reason.
I'm used to, I know that's like the whole New York vibe is. I know, especially like seeing people who aren't from here come here, they're always shocked by how everyone is just kind of like bumping into each other and yelling at each other, and everyone's always like rushing everywhere. Which it is. It's a whole different kind of animal in terms of the culture of how people act here.
Yeah, and but you know something, for, for the, just, for the music side of it, it's still a place where if you can make it in New York, you can make it anywhere.
So
and
Frank
I know
was right.
that's like an old saying, that's been cliche for a minute, but it holds true. It's like if you make it in New York, then the world is yours.
Yeah,
because it's the toughest place. It's the toughest place on the planet to make it in.
Is that how you saw it? Like when you were getting into the industry, when you were like young, is that kind of the vibe that you felt from New York?
Oh yeah, of course. I mean, I started out so long ago, but the thing was, I started as a DJ, so I was a member of a lot of different record pools that they had back then. And back then, you had record pools. That's how you got, promotion copies for music, and that, that was cool because now you get a chance to be with all the DJs from in the clubs that was in Manhattan and Jersey, Staten Island, Bronx, Brooklyn. So that was an experience, so just to be able to be amongst your peers or the people that you want to be around. And me, and Chuck at the time, me and Chuck was partners up with our DJ outfit. We would come into the city and get records and stuff and buy records and everything else.
And how old were you when that started, when you started working as a DJ?
Oh man, I started in my teens, man. I had to be like, 16, 17.
And how long into that did you start Spectrum City?
Well, I started right after it. I'll say when I was about 18.
Okay, so that was fresh into your career as a DJ.
Exactly. And it's funny because before I even made records, I was already plugged wired into the scene. So I kind of like knew a lot of the DJs and stuff, a lot of very famous, DJs like the John Morales and Jelly Bean Benitez and cats like that were huge in the DJ scene. And that got me to understand a lot about the record industry because I learned a lot from understanding the independent record companies at the time, whether it be Tommy Boy Records, Next Plateau Records, Select Records. All of these were independent record companies that were putting out rap records. Arthur Baker's Streetwise Records. And so I was getting a lot of promo copies from all of these different record companies along with the majors. And all the majors were in the city. So just like it is now.
Yeah.
So I was getting promotional copies from all different record companies. So I have my fingers on the pulse on whatever came out at any given time. So I would have these records well before they even got to radio.
And you were DJing with a whole like smattering of rappers at the time, right? Like Spectrum City was it was like a rotating group of people that would come in and you DJ with, right?
Exactly. It was like a collective, if you want to call it that. I kind of like it's funny. We're mostly DJs or record selectors, if you want to call it. But by being there, we kind of like brought on other rappers, and things of that neighborhood that was from the neighborhood. Chuck was one of them. Of course, when I met Chuck was through that as well. And so the whole Public Enemy was based and created from the Spectrum City DJ outfit, so to speak.
And how did it get narrowed down specifically? Because you put out the track Lies in '84. And how did it get, out of all those people, how did it get narrowed down to Chuck D and Butch Cassidy for that track?
Well, Chuck and Butch was the two primary MCs that was on the radio station that we was doing, which was WBAU out in Long Island. It was out at Adelphi University. So I guess at the time we didn't have any like name for the group or anything. So we just said, we wanted to put out a record because we saw a lot of artists that was putting out records like Grandmaster Flash and Treacherous 3 and the Disco 4. I mean Grandmaster DXT, Fab Five Freddy. I can go on for days. And these were all the tradition of the Cold Crush Brothers. These were all artists that was making records independently.
Mm-hmm.
And so, quite naturally, as playing a lot of those records and breaking a lot of those records in Long Island, we wanted to kind of like see if we can try our hand at making a record ourselves.
And then you came out.
We went to we first got signed to a independent label called Vanguard Records,
mm-hmm.
and a well-known DJ by the name of Pinky Velasquez produced the first record, and he produced it as almost like an electro record. If you're very familiar with the Egypt record, that was damn, I'm forgetting names. Egyptian Lover put out.
I'm vaguely familiar, but not too well versed.
I know, but if you when rap started, it was more electro bass
mm-hmm.
than it was the slower, funkier hip hop records. And so a lot of the groups were putting out records in that, and that was coincided with the freestyle movement. And so if you're familiar with, if you go back and do research on the freestyle movement was basically, it took off from the Planet Rock record, mm-hmm. and that particular record was basically inspired by Kraftwerk's Trans-Europe Express. And lo and behold, people didn't know that was a big B-boy record. We called it B-boy back in the days, and that was a classic for a lot of the rappers that wanted to kind of like rhyme and stuff. And so those records, so the producer that we was with, he was from that genre, that era, and so he produced the record.
You weren't producing at the time. You were just DJing.
No, I didn't produce the record. And that's what led me to realize that I didn't like the production, because he spent a lot of time making that record. And then when the final results came out, I wasn't happy with it, because I thought that record represented to me what was something that was happening a while back that I thought was now starting to run its course. So I wanted to do something a little bit more street heavy. So with a little bit of time, I got a chance to produce the B-side of that record.
Was that Check Out the Radio?
Get any attention. Check Out the Radio, correct.
Gotcha.
And so from that point, it just got me to understanding like the production process. And the reason why I got into it is because I never wanted to be a producer. That wasn't a thing that I didn't like. I didn't go out to set out to be a producer, but I just saw that when I was in the studio, there was a bunch of things that I would have done differently that I saw that was being handled. And so then I decided, I said, you know what? Why don't I just step in and do the production, because I couldn't afford to produce, to get real, quote unquote, real producers to produce the record. And so I took a demo, me and Chuck took a demo to Russell Simmons, and we wanted him to produce the record with that, and producing the Curtis Blow records. He was producing the Run-DMC records. And he suggested that we go to his new partner at the time, Rick Rubin. Mm-hmm. And Rick at the time, when I listened to the record that Rick did, which was gosh, I can't think of the title of the record. It's Yours by Tila Rock. Mm-hmm. All right. So if you go up and check out that record, you will see it. Tila Rock record. It's called It's Yours. Produced by Rick Rubin. Now that record was very similar to the demos we were making on WBAU when we put out records. So we didn't have, there wasn't a lot of rap records at the time to fill up a whole show. So what we would do is I would go in and bring in local guys from the neighborhood that would just rap on the beats. And I would have a drum machine. We started out, me and my brother Keith we started out on using the Roland CR 8000. And you could probably you could see it on eBay now. It goes for about, I think it goes for about a couple of grand, $1,500 to $2,000 now. But that particular drum machine had a preset amounts of beats. It had a lot of presets on it, and it also had an area where you can program your own beats, but you had to program it in step fashion. So in other words, you couldn't hear what it was that you was programming. You just would press buttons and then hope to get something that was kind of remotely usable. Mm-hmm. But and so we would play the beat and then have the rappers rap, and then when the choruses come in, we would scratch something from a record, and basically we'll look for a horn hit or a brass sound, something that will give it that extra high frequency area that we was looking for, and we were scratching in the choruses. And we made a lot of demos like that. And when Russell told me and Chuck that he wanted Rick Rubin to produce the record, and I went in and saw what he was doing, I said, wait a minute, I could do that. We're doing that kind of stuff already, And so that's when when Rick decided that he wanted to, we produced this demo called Public Enemy No. 1. Mm-hmm. And that particular demo was the most requested record on the radio station. So for me, using the radio station was kind of like a form of testing out what the public would want to hear before you get a chance to put it out. And so that showed me that there's always something that you can do when you're trying to figure out like what you want to do with what you want to put out, or whether or not you have a track and you have a record and you have something in mind and you don't know how the public is going to accept it. It's always good to test it in a club environment, or test it in some way, or a radio station, somewhere where you can broadcast to a group of people so that you can get feedback. Mm-hmm. And so we got feedback from that record, and that record was huge in terms of the feedback that we got. It caught the attention of Rick anyway, and Rick decided that he wanted to sign, Chuck to a 12-inch deal.
So this must have been right after Rick started Def Jam, right? Exactly.
Matter of fact, he was still in the dorms at NYU.
Right down the street from New School.
Exactly.
And are you, because back on the check out the radio record, you and Keith are both listed by your birth name. And I wanted to ask, because if you go, I don't have an actual physical copy.
Right.
But I want to ask, when did it become going as publicly as Shocklee, and which one of you initiated that?
Well, it's funny because it came from a thing where me and Chuck would always say that that I'm the president because I was the leader of everything. All right, and so Shocklee just came from something that we thought would sound kind of good on the radio, because mm-hmm. I didn't like my government name being put out there. So I since I've always went with Hank as my first name, which is actually my middle name, which is actually a nickname from my middle name, I decided to use the Shocklee as a moniker, so to speak. Just something that had a little bit more flair, and it sounded kind of interesting across on the radio when you say it.
And Keith was just down to do it himself too.
And Keith was my brother. So
yeah.
There
so
you
you kind of pushed him into it, but he was fine with it.
Exactly.
And so the first Public Enemy No. 1, the demo comes out. See, then after that, how long after that is it that Rick Rubin wants to sign you? Like days, weeks, months?
Well, something's hard to tell because we was going back and forth. Mm-hmm. Because one of the things that we didn't want to do was we never wanted to sign to a major record company or any kind of record company, because I worked with, I was already at the time throwing events. I was a promoter. So as I was throwing events, I was already hiring artists to come play for my events. and I heard all the horror stories about their record companies and all the stuff that was going on. And I said, well, why would we want to sign to these record companies when I'm pretty much the promoter and I'm nobody and I'm bringing in big name artists. You know, we brought in the Fat Boys, we brought in we brought in the Treacherous 3, the Fearless 4, all of these guys that we brought in, Grandmaster, Flash, we brought in MC Shan, we did Stetsasonic. I mean, we would bring all of these artists and basically, you know, we're paying them to play for us. Mm-hmm. And so what I was saying, I was saying like, well, why would we want to record for labels? So it took like a year and a half, you know, before we decided to go ahead when one of our friend at the time, which was Bill Stephanie, who the one that gave us that started us on the radio show at WBAU, it became the promotion director for Def Jam Records.
And how do they convince you so early on though? Because it's not like they're just starting. How do they show you that they're going to make their worth, you know, make it worth it for you?
Well, that was the whole key, because it was Bill Stephanie, the one that convinced us, because when he started working for them, that he convinced me that Def Jam was legit. In other words, like they were the most fairest company that you can work with. And at the time, they had just released the LL Cool J album that did well through Columbia Records. That was a subsidiary of Sony. And so that album did very well for LL. And so we decided that, okay, well, we'll try this. And they only signed us for a 12-inch record.
And was that Yo Bum Rush?
That was Public Enemy #1.
Oh, that was Public Enemy 1. Okay, gotcha.
Correct. Yeah. So that was the deal that we had. But because of the fact that, you know, I've already had my own studio and everything, is that we produced seven tracks off of the contract that they gave us for one record. Mm. So once we delivered 7 tracks, they were like, well, why don't we just roll this into an album? And so that's thus when the concept of Public Enemy became, is because it was always modeled after, it was more modeled after rock and roll than it was R&B. And
so that's what, around like 1986, 1987?
1986, correct.
Okay.
The record was released in 1987.
So those 7 tracks are what would become Bum Rush the Show?
Yes.
Gotcha.
Yes.
And so between that comes out in 87, right. And then A Nation of Millions comes out in 88. What is it that happens during those like 15 or 16 months? And how much do you feel during that time that the group's sound, you know, kind of morphed and changed?
Well, you know, it's the first thing is that when we was in the studio, the one thing I never wanted to do was I never wanted to have a lag time between records. And the reason that record was actually made a year before, was actually made in 86, but it wasn't released until 87. And so at that time, there was a whole year that the record was released. And and at the time, the rap business was all a 12-inch business. So it being a 12-inch business, what does that mean? That means that guys can make a record today, and in less than 6 weeks, the record's on the streets. Mm-hmm. And so what happens is, in the rap world, a whole year is like a decade. So what happens is the sound changes, the language changes, everything changes now. So we've always felt that record, the first record, was, even though that we thought it was a good attempt by us, but it didn't represent what we were really about and what we were really going for, because we've done it really, really quick with no budget.
Mm-hmm. And do you ever go back and listen to those records? And I know you say that it's not what at the time you thought, you wanted your sound to be, or it didn't represent you. Do you ever go back now and listen to them and see if you still agree with that, or maybe is there some stuff off that first record that you do like?
You know something, because I'm kind of a perfectionist.
Mm-hmm.
I still cringe at it, because and here's why. It's because you always think that when you're listening to your music, you're always thinking that you could do something better. You know, it's like you never, you know, I look at it this way. When you're making a record, you never finish a record. You surrender.
That's a great way to put it.
Exactly. So what happens is, so you're working on this thing, and it's never coming. You never can get it right, and then you just gotta quit because you have to make your deadline,
Mm-hmm.
and so that always leaves you with like there's always something that you wanted to do that you never got a chance to do, and so when I listen back to those records, I always hear the things that could have been done, not what's there. It's just lo and behold that the techniques that we used were ahead of what everybody else was doing at the time.
Mm-hmm.
And keep in mind that the techniques that we've done on those records and what we've done on those records were very similar to the stuff that you're hearing today. So all the techniques that you look at today as being like a staple, like, you know, cutting up a sample, chopping it, so to speak, filtering the sounds. All of those things were stuff that we kind of like had to invent, because none of that stuff existed at the time. Because if you understand, at that time when you went into the studio, you went into the studio with a band, so to speak, or a bunch of musicians. And a drum machine. And that's how you pretty much made your record. All right. We didn't do it that way. We went into the studio with just a bunch of records. And so thus everybody in the studio had to be taught how to deal with us, because we didn't come in with a traditional, okay, well, here's the drum machine, here's the drum beat, here's the synth, here's the key, here's the bass lines on the synth, and then maybe some scratches will be thrown in there, or maybe you get a guitar player that comes in and play, and then you loop that for 8 bars or whatever the case may be. We didn't come in like that. We came in with a bunch of records and taking little bits of samples from each of these records to make up a record.
And did you have any idea going in, like, oh, I like this record, there's this particular part, I will probably end up using that once I'm in the studio? And are Chuck and Flava Flav, are they coming up with stuff before you guys have even started producing? Is there any, like, I mean, saying like a pre-recording meeting makes it sound, you know, too fancy and commercial, but was there any thought before going into the studio of what you might be going towards?
Well, keep in mind that, you know, I have a lot of records, like thousands of records, and all genres and all different flavors. Like I had a spoken word section that was like 100 records of just spoken word. So if James Baldwin had an album, I had his album of just him speaking poetry. And that goes on for Malcolm X, Langston Hughes, you know, you name it, Booker T. Washington, W.E.B. Du Bois, John F. Kennedy. I got all of these records, and along with I got funk records galore. I got rap records galore. So I have a real good library of sounds and collections of stuff. Reggae records, soca records, all kinds of stuff.
Was there a particular genre that you were mostly going to when you're in the studio?
I don't, because I don't look at music in terms of genre. I just look at it in terms of style.
Mm-hmm.
So I've never been like tribal in that sense, to the point where I only listen to rap, or I only listen to funk or soul records or R&B, or, you know, no, I managed the heavy metal record store. So I know heavy metal just as much as I know R&B and funk.
When did you do that?
So I did that before I made a record. You know, right? You know, so so me managing the heavy metal store taught me to understand what about Megadeth, Quiet Riot, Poison. I can go, Kiss. We can go on Black Sabbath. You go. The list goes on. And I've always collected a lot of different records. Whether it be jazz records. I have an extensive jazz collection as well. So records and sound. So when I look at records, I never look at records like people will look at records as a tune. I look at a record as a collections of sounds and different sounds that can give you different kinds of feelings. Mm-hmm. So when I listen to music, I see the visual in the music. So that's how I pick samples. So I have to see, like, for example, it depends on what is the emotion that you're trying to get from this particular record. If it's anger, now I'm going to go after all the sounds that I think that associated with anger. Gotcha. And then you just put them up on the board and try to see which ones work together, which parts work together and which parts doesn't.
And are you just kind of like, do you have a particular thought about the kind of stuff you're doing in terms of, you're saying that you're kind of in pioneering the wheel in terms of filtering and sampling. While you're doing that, are you thinking like, oh man, we're doing the next big thing? Are you just kind of going like, we're not totally sure because there's no real evidence as to whether or not this will work because it's brand new?
Exactly, and it's the latter. It's because I never go into a studio thinking that anything is good, because the first thing I do is when I'm in the studio, I'm listening with a hater's head, because I want to listen from the perspective of this is pure shit. And if I go in with thinking that it's pure shit, now I have to convince myself that it's not. Mm-hmm. And so now if I can, because I'm my own worst critic. If I can convince myself that this is worth something, then I know at least it has a shot out there. Now, I don't know for sure whether it's going to work or not. I just know that it's going to have a shot.
Yeah,
and you do your best. You just do your best to be able to put the things together to how you see it as tight as possible, so that it doesn't have any holes in it.
Mm-hmm. And you're your own harshest critic, but has there ever been a time where someone maybe reviewed a record you worked on and, against all your better judgment, it kind of made you sort of rethink maybe I should or shouldn't be doing certain things?
No, because I think that you have to look at criticism like they say buttholes. Everybody has one.
Was it? And they all stink or something like that? Half of them stink?
Exactly. I never really care about. I don't really care about like what people think, because like even if you love it, if you think it's the greatest thing in the world, I'm like, yeah, okay. And if you think it's the worst piece of shit in the world, I'm like, yeah, okay. Because I never want to get emotionally attached to it. Mm-hmm. Because I think that once you become emotionally attached to your music, you lose your point of objectivity. And so now you become sucked into something that you feel passionate about that other people might not feel as passionate about. And then you're gonna take that and bring it inward and think that there's something wrong with you now. Mm. I think that your work and you are two separate things.
And how do you keep yourself being that objective, just trying to look at it like it's shit? Is that your main, tactic to keep yourself from being too subjective about it?
Well, I'm harsh on everything, a lot of things, but at the same time, I can also see the how would you say it? I can see the inspiration and where you're trying to go when you're trying to make something. Mm-hmm. So I would never how would you say, I would never criticize the development of something, because I think that's when you kill the inspiration when you do that. So you have to allow that kernel of creativity to kind of like gestate itself, so that it gets to it, so that it becomes something. Then you can look at it objectively. But you can't criticize that process while it's developing.
You just got to let it flow.
Right.
And, you know, talking about you're making things purely from just, I want this sound. I want, you know, it's only coming from a place of creativity. It kind of leads into a question we got in the comments from Mr. Orange Bananas, an old student of yours and a fantastic friend of mine. He's over in Croatia right now. First of all, he says, Hank, you're the best teacher I've ever had. So
Wow.
But he followed that up with a question saying, have you ever made a record that had a heavy accent on making money? I think he means like, was there an emphasis on thinking like, ooh, if we do this, we're going to sell a bunch of records?
Well, I've never looked at making money as a thing. And the reason why I never look at it as a thing is because money is a result of something. It's the result of the hard work that you've put into something. So to me, it's all about putting in the work. If you put in the work and you make something as best as you think it should be under the time constraints, that's all you can do. Now you have to leave the rest up to the universe. Mm-hmm. The universe is either going to accept it or reject it. And it's been my experience that the universe usually accepts it as long as you've been true to the process. As long as you put your energy into it and you've done the best job you can do, people's going to see that. No matter what your shortcomings are.
That sounds kind of like a spiritual way to look at it. Are you a pretty spiritual person?
Well, you have to understand something. If you're making music, you have to be connected to the spiritual realm because you're not making anything physical. You're playing with the ether. So you're playing with people's emotions and everything. So you are spiritual musicians or magicians at the same time. So you have to respect that. And I'm a firm believer of it is people are attracted to authenticity. Mm-hmm. And if you're authentic and every part of the process that you do is authentic, then that work is going to find a home because people are always looking for something that's authentic.
Yeah. And so the thing I struggle with is sort of, how do I match that thing of trying to do exactly what I want to do in terms of, like, say, if I'm writing a song or producing a song, the thing I struggle with is how do I make something that's real to me and kind of separate myself from the, theoretical knowledge in my head? Because there are times where I write something and I think that this is emotionally, it's strong, I feel it, but at the same time, there's this like part in the back of my head that goes, that's very basic. And I have to kind of like talk myself out of that thing, just related to what you said. It's hard to focus sometimes on just being spiritual and just trying to make what's emotionally the strongest, especially the more experience you get writing music, because then you start to doubt yourself in terms of what you're doing and you start to go away from just the pure feeling of the music, which is what everyone who's going to listen is what they're listening for.
And that's only natural. Everyone has doubts. We all have doubts. None of us are, we're not perfect beings. But the thing that you have to understand is that you can't look at the stuff and take it too seriously. You can't take yourself that seriously at all, because I find that a lot of issues start to happen when people don't use an outside source to as a template. For example, I had records, so I can listen to the greatest records of all time and compare my works against. So if you're not comparing your works against stuff that's already been proven, then what's your barometer? So how are you judging what is good and what is not good? Mm-hmm. Then it just becomes a pure selfish ego thing where, I did it, so I think it's dope. Well, if you're not testing it against something and seeing how it holds up, then you're not gonna have what is known as, I call it that standard. Mm-hmm. You want to have that standard, and the standard is always going to be stuff that's already been out there. And I don't care whether that stuff is good or whether it's bad, whether you think it's good or bad. I think that you have to get away from the fact of thinking that your music is good and that other music sucks, or your music sucks and that other music's good. You have to abandon that style of thinking. You have to look at the components and what's speaking to you from this song that your record may or may not be speaking to, speaking to, if that makes sense.
Did you guys ever, like the two, main groups of Public Enemy, did you guys hold each other's to sort of like an objective standard, being like the Bomb Squad and then, Chuck and Flavor Flav? Were there any times where, say, you guys were doing something production-wise that they disagreed with or they didn't think was up to that standard, or vice versa? They were saying things and you weren't totally 100% on their lyrical content, or did you guys kind of stay out of each other's way?
No, because that's a very good question. But here's how I can attempt to answer that. The process to me is I'm the hardest critic, not only just of myself, to everybody around me. So I'm holding everybody to a higher level of stuff that they don't even know that they can reach. And so, and once again, I'm comparing everything that I do to what I consider be classic material. So for example, let's say if I think Prince's record, When Doves Cry, is probably the best record, made, right? Well, I'm going to hold my record up against that record and see how it fares. And if it doesn't meet that record, then to me, we fell short.
How does
and holding everybody accountable to that higher level of understanding raises the bar for everyone.
How do you hold yourself up to a standard of a record like that when you're making, you're making a heavy hip hop record, which I don't know if I'd really describe that, Prince's album like that. How do you hold those two types of music up to the same standard, even though they're, technically totally different? What are you listening for to do that?
Well, that's another great question. What you want to listen to is the feeling that you get. So it's not necessarily, you can't look at, music is not a mechanical process, even though that mechanics play a part in the process. It's the feeling that you get is what resonates to other human beings. So if my record, it doesn't matter what that record is. I can make a hip hop record and I can compare it to a Megadeth record. Because what am I comparing? I'm comparing the vibration of what Megadeth record gives me, and I'm comparing the same vibration of what I'm getting from this hip hop record. And if I don't get the same energy level, then I could sit there and say it fell short. Because the one thing that the public can always determine, they can determine energy. They can't determine the mechanics. They don't know whether the bass is too big or too loud, or the rhythm is not quite correct, or the rapper's not quite in time, or the vocals are not quite in key. They can't determine any of those things, per se. Mm-hmm. But what they can determine is how the whole thing works together and the energy of that whole thing. Mm-hmm. And does that energy make sense? And once it makes sense, you know that you're in the ballpark.
And on that topic of making music, feel right and make sense. So in 1990, the Bomb Squad produces Ice Cube's first record after NWA. Which is America KKK's Most Wanted with Delench Mob. So how did that come about? And also, how did you make your sound, the Bomb Squad sound, kind of fit more to him? Was there a big adjustment with that? Were you trying to make it suit him more? Or was it just kind of what came naturally? Or were you kind of approaching it the same way that you were when you produced for Public Enemy?
Well, the first thing that when Cube came over to us, he met us at Green Street Studios, and he said that he wanted us to produce the record. And for me, and I said to him, well, wait a minute, you're already with Dre and everybody. Why are you coming here? is that, and he had a specific reason for coming here. He wanted to have a sound that was separated from what he was doing before.
He wanted a more New York sound?
I don't know if he wanted the New York sound or he wanted the East West Coast sound. He just wanted something that was his own identity. Mm-hmm. The one thing that I've always was big on is I never make records a duplicate of the last record. So, for example, if I'm going to work with you, I'm going to work with you in the strength and in the environment that you're in. And I want to make the best record in your environment and not me give you for example, a cookie cutter. It's mm-hmm. like, okay, here's the stamp, and all you have to do is get on that stamp and you're going to be a clone of whatever that stamp is. That's not me.
Were you guys hesitant at all to go, to kind of take a break from Public Enemy to work on that record?
No, it was working on that record in the middle of working on tons of records.
Gotcha.
Because the Bomb Squad, the reason why there was the Bomb Squad, which was Eric, Sadler, Keith, me, Terminator, Chuck, and even Flav at moments. All right. And the reason for that being is because we was working on multiple projects at once. We would never work on just one project. So we have a lot of projects. I used to have, I would have 2 studios running back to back 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. Mm-hmm. So when you're looking at that, everything is all based upon tailor making a sound like a tailor would make a custom suit for you. So I don't believe in, so whether it be Belle Biv DeVoe, for example, who was the three background singers that got no lead how would you say it, shine from New Edition.
No spotlight?
Right. No spotlight whatsoever. They were just background singers. All right. So now what can we do to take that group and give it its own identity that's going to be separate and apart from New Edition, but something that's unique for themselves? So the same thing happens with Ice Cube. So the first thing that I do is I let Ice Cube in my room, my record room, and have him pick out all the records that he loves from it. So he's there for a week, just listening to records, picking out records, and putting together. Why did I do that? Because that right there is the embryo for me understanding who he is and what he's all about.
Was there any hesitation with all that sampling? You're letting him just freely pick the records, just purely on a legal thing. Did you ever have to worry about that, or did the label always take care? Did you have to make any notes of specifically what samples you were using so that way the label could go and license them later?
Well, yeah. Well, I that's the one thing that I've done. Well, I started what I consider to be the first sample clearance department. And it was a gentleman by the name of Michael Kloster, who was at the time working for me at Soul Records, and I had him clear all my samples. Now I was clearing samples before people was clearing samples because I saw what was coming down the pike. When I saw a lot of artists that was just taking a loop and running it for the whole record, and I said, wait a minute, there's going to be a legal precedent that's gonna change all that in a minute. So I cleared all my samples that we used, and so in doing so, that gave me the leverage to be able to do the things that we were doing and have the legalities of what we have, so that even to today, those records are in soundtracks and movies and films and television programs and all kinds of stuff. And that stuff is legal and clear.
Yeah, there's a bunch of them, talking about all the stuff there. There's a bunch of them in video games too.
Exactly.
A bunch of Public Enemy tracks and I think GTA 3 and GTA Vice City or something like that. Did you ever get a chance to play any video games and hear your work in it? Something, that's the one thing I've never had time for. Hank, I'm going to buy you a PlayStation 2 at an old game store, and I'm going to ship it to your house with a copy of GTA. Listen, GTA 2 or whatever it is.
listen. My son and daughter both just bought the new PlayStations now.
The PlayStation 5.
Yeah, so
Oh,
they
they're up
got
on
they
it.
got them both. They got them both, and so I'm inundated with it. I just don't have the time. All right,
Yeah.
that's the difference. All right, but the thing that I say is this: I always want to make sure that as a musician, you should have a lot of control over your works. And so if you're going to sample, make sure that you clear it in advance. If not, I would find a way around that. That's the only way that I could deal with that, because as you could see with the case that happened with Pharrell and
Robin Thicke.
Help me, Robin Thicke.
Yeah, for
right.
everybody get up. What if blurred lines?
Exactly. And that ruling was atrocious, but it showed you that if you don't take care of your business, then that stuff can bite you. And so that record cost them a grip more than they probably made off the record. And I feel for those guys.
They shouldn't, because juries just a lot of the time don't know the specific laws, because a jury is just random people. They don't know musical terminology and what to listen for. So it's a really subjective part of the law in terms of sampling and copyright law, because people don't know what to listen for, because that's not what they do on a regular basis. I can't stand this freaking internet.
I know. It's terrible.
I try my best. I'm wired in Ethernet. No matter what I do, I always end up with some problem. But Hank,
yeah.
I don't want to keep you over. So can I ask you one more quick question before you go?
Sure. No problem.
Okay. You've told me before, we've been talking about music this whole time. Let's get off music for 1 second just to close it. I know. Oh, geez, am I losing you again? Son of a gun. Terrible.
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay.
Go ahead. You can get it in. Get it in now.
Let's do it. Yeah, I know you're a big fan of comic books, right?
Yes, sir.
You've told me about that. Who are your top 5 favorite comic book characters for everyone who's watching?
Oh God, Daredevil, Green Lantern, the Hulk,
Hey.
Spider-Man. Who else? And Flash, the Flash.
Just like the Grandmaster.
That's right. That's right.
Well, Hank, you know what? Let's do this. Let's F off before the internet does it for us.
I know. But
Hank,
but Scotty, thank you, man. I'm grateful and honored to be on the Vibe, man.
Thank you so much. I appreciate it. To everyone listening, thank you so much. If you want to check this out, audio version will be up on wherever you get your podcasts. Clips will be up on YouTube. You know how it is. Thank you so much for watching. I'm sorry if it cut out for the last couple minutes. Anyway, I'll see you all next time.
Wow.
What?